Englefield Green. I won't go till I'm fetched. You won't go until you're fetched? Son, did you repeat that sentence of 7 words because you heard someone else use them without fully understanding their meaning? Let me help you to run the rule over yourself. If in the future the most glorious page is added to our history, and you were asked what part you had taken, won't your cheeks burn with shame if you were to tell them that you didn't go till you were fetched? You pride yourself upon being a free-born Englishman. You at once write yourself down as a slave. What more do you want to convince you of your duty? Do you want to see more barbarisms, more cruelties, more atrocities? Do you want to see women and children outraged, cut into pieces and flung in heaps in our market squares? I cannot think that a son of mine is so callous as that. Well, after the war is over, if it is our victory, your shame will hang around your neck like a lump of lead. If it be our defeat, it will have been through your fault, and only yours. Let me put it in a way you may understand. If you were on board a ship and it became waterlogged, and you refused to take your share at the pumps, you would have no right to the rations. You are free to refuse to fight, but that refusal deprives you of the right to benefit by those who do. The signs are ominous that some form of compulsory service will have to be adopted. Now, the finest thing in our history has been the response of the noble manhood of Great Britain, and they came as free men. Will they not be justified if they refuse to have men in their regiments who had to be fetched? Let me make one last appeal to you, my beloved son. There comes in life at least one moment of inspiration. Now is that very moment, and the choice between the perishable and the eternal must be made.
Welcome to Territorials, the troops billeted at Egham. This weekend, we, Egham residents, were delighted to welcome over 1,000 soldiers of the 7th Reserve Battalion of the Territorials Middlesex Regiment. The new drill hall in Park Road will be their headquarters, while the men themselves are billeted in private houses. Myself and several of my friends and neighbours are among the many householders who have volunteered to receive 1 or 2 of the men, boys in some cases, and in return receive the sum of 2 and 6pence a day per person housed. The Constitutional and the Liberal clubs have been opened to them, and we all hope that they will be comfortable in Egham. It's interesting to note that the bars of public houses are out of bounds before noon and after 9 o'clock to these visiting troops. The battalion has a very strong football team, senior as I understand it, and matches are already being arranged. In addition to these amusements, the congregational schoolroom has been opened as a recreational room for the men, and the Reverend A.E. Snashall appeals for games, chess, dominoes, etc. to be sent there. Trade in many branches has already shown a welcome increase, and the presence of the Territorials should make a considerable difference to shopkeepers. I speak on behalf of my friends and neighbours when I welcome the Territorials to Egham, and hope that their stay here is a comfortable one.
Egham Football Club, to all members in the Army at home and abroad. Now that practically every one of the members of the Egham Football Club is on Army service, we, as the committee, would like to forward to them the following message. At this time of the year, when in peacetime we should all be looking forward to the second half of the football season, our thoughts turn to all of you who have answered your country's call and who have upheld the honour of the town, even as you fought for it in the Cup and League games. In the name of the committee and supporters of the club, we send you our heartiest wishes for the coming year, and express the hope that when the war is over, we shall all meet again under the auspices of the Egham Football Club.
The Chertsey-Egham spy incident. I'm sure you heard the news a couple of weeks ago of how a man of foreign appearance and with a foreign accent endeavouring to obtain employment at Egham and Line Farms was escorted to Egham police station by a gentleman well known in these parts, on the assumption that he was in fact a German spy. The stranger was of course investigated but released from custody without much delay and hastily jumped on a London-bound train. Well, this incident has come to mind because the Press Bureau are circulating the following information about an alleged spy named Rosenthal. The summary of the evidence in the case of the alleged spy Rosenthal was taken at Wellington Barracks. He'll be tried by court-martial. I later found out that this Robert Rosenthal was arrested at the beginning of this month as he was about to leave the country. He confessed that he was sent over by the German Admiralty to obtain information on naval matters. The coincidence between these two accounts is this. The man taken to Egham police station by Mr. C.J. Elliot, for it was he, had an envelope in his possession addressed to a Mr. Rosenthal in London. It's not a particularly common surname, I think you'll agree.
German spy scare chasing Egham High Street. I heard the most amusing tale from the landlord of my local public house. Stop him! Stop him! Was the cry, which rang through the High Street, Egham, at 10 o'clock on Boxing Day. Amid the clatter of horses and the glare of lamps, a man rushed along, pursued by 4 or 5 members of the Royal Engineers, whose horses are stabled at Stonylands. Only one shop was open, a newsagent, at the lower end of the street, and into this the man rushed hurriedly, explaining that the man was being pursued. He was allowed to escape through the house at the rear of the premises. Along came the engineers and demanded the man, denouncing him as the German who had attempted to tamper with the horses. Later, it came to light that the man who was accused was in fact a special constable for the metropolitan area, living in Egham for the holiday, and upon hearing something of a disturbance amongst the horses, he apparently tried to investigate, with the result that both he and the engineers had an unexpected race, which fortunately ended up all right.
Fatal accident to a Territorial. Knocked down by a motorcar at Egham. This weekend, we were reminded that not all tragedy and death sits comfortably within the confinement of the war, and that despite the uncertain and dramatic backdrop of the war, ordinary and unrelated accidents are still just as likely to occur. I am, of course, speaking of the young Territorial lad, Private John Richard Parks, of the 7th Reserve Middlesex Battalion, whose career and very life was cut short when he was knocked down by a motorcar whilst parading with his company in front of the Victoria Inn in Egham. The poor 16-year-old boy was struck down by a car being driven by Mr. Percy Barrow, who was carrying Mr. and Mrs. Jones of Kingston. The young private was seen by a major of the Royal Army Medical Corps, and without having shown signs of fatal injury, died during the night. When the aforementioned Major, George Pester Chappell, was called to visit young John at 6 o'clock on Friday evening, he was lying on the table of the Victoria Inn. He was in a state of concussion, though not unconscious. Witnesses who examined him could find no sign or symptom of fracture, but there were severe bruises on his temple, nose, wrist, and left hip. He was in much the same condition 3 hours later, but when he was checked upon the next morning, it was discovered that he had died during the night.
Private Godfrey killed. A comrade's touching tribute. Dear Mrs. Godfrey and family, by now you will have received the tragic news regarding your son's death. Albert was a brave soldier, and I felt compelled to write to you with my sincere apology and deepest respect. Your son was killed during an attack, which has greatly upset me, having been his chum for 8 years. He died instantly. I was lying close to him and heard the bullet hit him. His head was partly resting on his rifle, and when I touched him, I knew he was gone. The day before he died, he received a newspaper and a letter from home, and also sent a card home to say that he was all right. I myself was slightly wounded in the head, so did not see him buried, but I will not forget him. It's heartbreaking to let you know. I don't suppose I shall ever come across another kid like him. He had done his utmost for me in every respect. Archie Saunders, one who cannot forget.
Alleged trading with Germany. £2,000 bail against well-known resident. It has just come to my attention that one of the best-known residents of the locality is involved in a Guildhall case which opened on Tuesday, in which William Gardner Ridgeon, William Fownes Ridgeon and Stanley Fownes Ridgeon are accused of trading with the enemy by obtaining goods through Germany between September the 15th and December the 15th, 1914. The defendants are partners in the well-known firm of Fownes Brothers & Co., glove manufacturers of 71 Gresham Street. The firm was purely English, all the partners being Englishmen, but they also had a factory in Worcester, a branch in New York, and an establishment in Germany which was registered as a limited company. It's been shown that since the war started, the company has imported £6,000 worth of products from Germany to its New York branch. They did not, in fact, even pay for these goods, but that was not owing so much to the partners in London as to the objections in New York, because there are letters in existence illustrating the London partners' intention to pay if a safe way could be found. However, it has been suggested that an undertaking was given to the German manufacturers to assure them that while they could not have the cash for their goods in the present, they should be paid at the end of the war with interest.
Volunteer Training Corps invasion of Thorpe. Chertsey platoons outmaneuver Egham Company. We, Thorpe residents, were invaded on Sunday afternoon. By at least half a dozen ways into Thorpe they came, intent on capturing the village made famous by its squabbles and of establishing a line of outposts. They were the platoons of the Chertsey-A and Egham D companies of the 3rd Surrey Battalion Volunteer Training Corps. Scouts on motorcycles, push bikes or on foot hurried backwards and forwards. Prominent local tradesmen could have been seen quite happily engaged in secreting themselves in muddy ditches. Several small engagements were fought, and when at the conclusion all assembled by the junction of the road near the schools, a remarkable result was forthcoming. Practically every officer and man of the Egham Company had been made a prisoner, whilst as far as could be ascertained, the various platoons of the Chertsey Company had not lost an individual. Platoon number 1, Lieutenant Crosby, went by Thorpe Fields, and upon arriving at the church found that their trio of scouts had already bagged 2 Egham scouts, advancing along the roadway by Price's farm. Only a few minutes were to spare, but the Chertsey men were hurried round by the farm, and presently a nice healthy contingent of Eghamites, feeling themselves secure in the fact that their scouts had not reported any enemy in sight, were somewhat surprised to find themselves prisoners even before reaching the spot that they were to make their headquarters.
Eggs for the Wounded, a soldier's letter of thanks. As one of the many Englefield Green residents that has regularly sent eggs to the front through the National Egg Fund, I was delighted to receive a thank you letter from one of the recipients. Myself and many others have been writing our names and addresses on the eggs that we donate. 2,268 eggs and £8 in money has been donated to this worthy cause from the Englefield Green residents in the past 2 months alone, and therefore I'd like to share this token of thanks with all of you. Dear friend, just a little line to say that I am the soldier that received your autographed egg. I am a private in C Company, 9th Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, Territorials, and have been out here for 4 months. This is my first time in hospital, having had the misfortune to be gassed on Monday, May the 24th. It's an awful thing, this gas which the enemy are using. It takes the breath completely away from you and leaves you absolutely helpless. And those who are lucky enough to reach hospital have to start and fight for their breath. Of course, we had respirators, but they did not seem to do much good. But I think this gas was of a more powerful nature. This was the second time I had experienced it, but the first was nothing to this second dose. However, I am progressing fine, with the aid of your fresh eggs, and hope to be out of bed soon. I must close now, thanking you for your kindness to us soldiers. I remain yours, A. Macmillan, from the Australian-based Hospital, France, June 4th.
The death of a hero, Sapper Harry Pierce on the battlefield. This week, our home added itself to the ever-increasing list of houses shrouded in mourning, when we received news that my courageous and beloved brother-in-law and sapper, Harry Pierce, was killed serving his country on the battlefield. Harry was a great fellow who took over the business of coal merchant from his father and was very highly respected by everyone who knew him. He was always cheery, and his death will be mourned by many who knew him as a real friend. He was called up from the reserve and was with the Royal Engineers 4th Guards Brigade Expeditionary Force. My poor sister received the following letter. Dear Mrs. Pierce, just a few lines bearing, I am afraid, bad news. And that is that Harry was killed yesterday by a round in the chest, severing a main artery and causing internal bleeding. But thank goodness he passed away quite peacefully, and his last words were of you and the children. I was with him until he lost consciousness, and then I had to leave him. But, my dear friend, rest assured that everything was done for him that could possibly be done, and he died the death of a hero. I dare say you will hear from a clergyman in a day or two. I am afraid I have broken the news rather abruptly, but I promised Harry I would write to you, and I have fulfilled my promise. Expressing the deepest sympathy from the whole company and myself, your sincere friend, Bert.
A year of war. How Egham has changed. I've been thinking back to July in 1914. It's not easy for us to carry our thoughts back to that month, when the only cloud on the horizon was that affair of Ulster. Egham was then a vastly different place to what it is today. Then we were thinking of business, sport and the social round, cricket, tennis, the river, the approaching football and hockey seasons, of anything but the coming catastrophe. The first days of August found everyone incredulous of the need for Britain's calls to arms, while viewing with alarm the events in the Near East. The mobilisation, the declaration of war and the subsequent events in Perily are well known. The Egham Territorials and reservists were the first from the district to respond to the call, but quickly others followed, against their desire and against their whole ideas of their lives. Recruiting in the parish has been in fact entirely satisfactory, as you can see. There are hardly any eligible young men left. After the fighting had been in progress for some time, there came the question of the wounded, and we womenfolk of Egham willingly gave money, materials and time so the necessities and luxuries could be supplied. A local voluntary aid detachment was formed, and later the scheme matured for a Red Cross hospital in Englefield Green. This is nearing completion, and we will soon be ready to receive 100 wounded troops direct from the front. The Soldiers and Sailors Families Association, which has been carried on locally since the Boer War, immediately got to work, and incalculable good has been done in the days on uncertainty when government allowances had an annoying habit of being overdue or stray. The local gentry have subscribed generously to the relief funds, and various means have been devised to raise money, notably through local concerts.
Yarns at the Front. Rapid Firing at 3 Cows by Corporal G. Granham. Dear Mother and Father, I am writing this to you to give a little insight into my life on the front. I am, in fact, writing this letter from the roof of a house whilst on the lookout for Germans. 2 nights ago, myself and an officer were given a rather queer assignment. We crawled through a field of mangles, which were all wet up to a farm. Upon peering through the farmhouse window, we saw a party of 6 burly, beer-soaked German officers warming themselves around a fire. We could have shot the lot, there and then, but it wouldn't have been honourable. Instead, we fetched our squadron and surrounded the farmhouse and captured the German officers. The following night, last night, was most unusual indeed. It was a particularly dark and still night in the trenches when, all of a sudden, we heard something lumbering towards us. The rapid fire order was given, and I fired 15 rounds off in about 2 shakes. Nothing happened. Everything was still and eerie. So I ventured forth to investigate, and what did I find but 2 beautiful milking cows lying dead and one seriously wounded. My attention was then caught by a rustling in a nearby tree, and I fortunately spotted a German sniper climbing it. All I will say of that matter is that he came down quicker than he went up. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity dipping into these sort of little archives, private correspondence, news reports, evidence of what people from Egham were doing out on the continent, but also Egham of how life went on and was perhaps humorous or challenging. And these little voices, ordinary people, really bring home, I think, to any of us today who may have had our own relatives fighting abroad or struggling with local issues. It's these little granular bits of evidence that bring it all to light. And I love the idea, especially of the Egham and Chertsey scouts on their bikes, businessmen in muddy ditches, preparing themselves to defend their community if necessary. It's rather contrasted with the sad death of the 2 cows. A German sniper was captured, so I suppose it was worth it in the end. And with any luck, those English soldiers perhaps dined on good rump steak later on that day. Let's hope so.